Welcome to All Things Autism by Court One, where we explore the many facets of autism support, awareness, and advocacy. I'm Anisha, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts Niyati and Pranavi.
Today, we will be talking about a topic that is essential to understand when dealing with the development disorder, early intervention, specifically for autism spectrum disorder or ASD.
Here's something to think about. Children with ASD who begin intensive intervention before age 3 are more likely to develop functional language, social skills, and adaptive behavior than those who begin later. And yet, many children aren't diagnosed until age 4 or later, often missing the most critical window for support.
And to help us unpack this important topic, we're joined by Patricia Gries, an experienced ASD intervention specialist who's worked closely with young children and their families to build developmental foundations from the ground up. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you.
Let's start with something foundational, because early intervention is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but not everyone fully understands what it means.
So, what exactly is meant by early intervention when it comes to autism spectrum disorder?
Early intervention is a term applied to medical assistance or educational assistance for children ages 0 to 3 years old. So it's just accessing intervention at a very young age in order to help the very new young brain be able to make modifications and learn to the best of its ability.
Awesome. Thank you for that excellent explanation. Many do not know what early intervention is, so it's important to clarify the definition behind it. Regarding this practice, what counts as early intervention, and how early must it be to make a difference?
Well, young brains can take in so much information and they're more adaptable. So that makes early intervention incredibly important. I like to think about making motor pathways in the brain, like establishing paths through a wooded area. And the more times you walk over that path, the more developed that path becomes. And that's what motor planning in the brain looks like. So the earlier you start making those pathways and using those pathways, the better able to access them the brain is. So it's kind of like making good habits right from the start instead of waiting later to change habits that are not as successful.
Thank you so much. And to that point, some parents wonder how early is too early. So let's dig into the intersection between detection and intervention to learn more about ASD treatments. How early can ASD be detected, and when can treatments actually begin?
In an article that I read on a study that was done, it said that autism spectrum disorder can be diagnosed between 12 and 24 months of age. A lot of the diagnosis has to do with interaction with other people, and so it's harder to notice if there's a deficit with that before the age of 12 months. There might be some gross motor delays, like the child may be later with sitting, crawling, standing, and walking. So the pediatrician might notice developmental delays with gross motor activities. But since we don't start speaking and interacting until a little bit later, they tend to not, those deficits that are more with interaction with others don't show up until a little bit later. So anytime after 12 months, but it can sometimes take a while to tease out exactly what the deficit or neurological disorder is.
Thank you so much for this insight. So, once a diagnosis is made or signs are observed, the next step is often finding support. But it's always not clear what the goals of early intervention are. So, what specific developmental areas does early intervention target? Things like communication, motor skills, or social interaction?
Right. So exactly, you just named all of the things that I would say early intervention targets. When babies are young, of course, mostly what they're developing at first is gross motor activities, and those are the big movements that the body does: rolling over, sitting up, crawling, walking. And sometimes children with autism will demonstrate deficits with those activities, and sometimes they won't. Once we get beyond like 12 months of age, then we start seeing fine motor areas that children start to develop, like grabbing a toy, waving, um, putting something in their mouth, things like that. And then also after 12 months of age is also when we start seeing communication develop. So children might start to babble. You can tell they recognize their name. They'll turn their head to look when their name is called. Again, they might wave or give a high five. So all of those areas, if there are deficits, can be a target for early intervention to improve, as well as behavior. Sometimes you can also notice in babies as young as 12 months if they just are super fussy babies. And it's not always, that doesn't always mean that's autism. That might mean maybe they have colic or something, but you can start to look toward emotional regulation when they're babies as well. And the sooner you start to try to help improve any deficits you see, the sooner the brain develops in the way that it more typically should.
Well, thank you, Patricia. Those are all excellent points. To go along with that, we found an interesting study from a 2020 study published in Pediatrics, a medical journal. And in this study, they found that children who began early intervention services prior to 18 months of age showed significantly greater improvements in cognition, communication, and adaptive behavior by age 3 compared to those who started after 24 months.
Yes, and I would echo that we see that quite a bit in therapy. The sooner you can get started, the brain just makes so many motor pathways and develops neurologically so much between 0 and 3 years of age. The sooner you start working on any deficits you might see, the more the child will be able to gain.
That's so fascinating. It's so important to build social habits from such a young age. So, if someone like a toddler or an adolescent with autism is struggling with communication, what kind of therapy may help them express themselves better?
So there are actually several different types of therapy that can be used to help with social interaction. Um, there there are really two different types of therapies. There's your more traditional therapy like physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. And then there is ABA, which is applied behavioral analysis, which is behavioral therapy geared directly for children with autism. So, as far as communication goes, both speech therapy and occupational therapy work a lot with the child on interaction with others, both communication and just not both verbal and nonverbal interaction with other children, other adults. And then the ABA, they work a lot with children on helping them improve their emotional regulation, their social interaction, trying to kind of work away from behaviors that aren't working toward behaviors that do work better for the child to be able to be a part of different activities more successfully. So I would say all of those different types of therapy are helpful: speech therapy, occupational therapy, and ABA. I also forgot to mention that occupational therapy also works a lot with emotional regulation. So helping children be able to recognize their emotions and be able to try to regulate those emotions so that again they can be more successful in their interactions.
Of course, now we know that every child is different. Some children may respond better to more structured supports, while others benefit from more play-based or relational approaches. So, is there a therapy that involves more play-based systems to help kids with autism, and what does it look like?
So at I work for ABC Pediatric Therapy, and all of our therapy. I cannot speak for ABA because that's really separate from OTPT and speech. But for children, it's ABC's policy that play therapy is the best way to do therapy. It's what the child understands. So we try to gear all of our therapies toward play-based therapy. So for instance, I'm a physical therapist, and if I'm working with a child to help them maybe get stronger because they're weak, I'm not going to have them do sit-ups and push-ups. Instead, I'm going to approach it from a play base, and we're going to climb up the ladder to go down a slide. We're going to walk up some stairs to then jump into our foam pit. We're going to jump on a trampoline because that increases strength and balance and coordination and endurance. But all coming at the child from a play base, so that it keeps them involved. It makes them want to come back and play again the next time. And, we're working on their level. They're not going to respond very well to a list of activities that is given to them to do to try to help them. So when it comes to pediatric, play-based, in my opinion, is definitely the most beneficial way to approach therapy.
I think that that's an excellent explanation and a great way to approach treatment. So kind of building off of this, I think our next question would be, for one, do you know of any other non-behavioral interventions that show promise for young children on the spectrum? And kind of building off of that, are there any specific interventions that you look forward to trying in the future potentially?
I'm not sure about ABA if it's play-based. It's not really as much play-based as much as it really is though everyday life-based. So what ABA does is takes the children through everyday circumstances and tries to work with them to improve their interaction with others, their communication with others, regulate their emotions in order to give them the best chance for success out in groups of people. So I don't know if that is play based, but it is real world based. So maybe for behavior, that's the same idea. I think that ABA, as far as interventions go, it has changed a lot over the years. Back when it started 30, 40 years ago, maybe even more than that, it was more like a rewards-based program where they would try to get children to mimic the behaviors they wanted them to mimic, and then they would reward them for those behaviors. But then a lot of research was done that said, if this child really likes to, say, flap their hands, or they really like to spin a toy, do we necessarily need to take that away from them to make them better fit into typical society? And so ABA changed their approach to say, no, we don't. We need to work with this child to allow them to still be who they are, but maybe make some minor modifications to that to the extent that they want to be able to best interact with the typical world. So it's not really so much reward based anymore, as much as it is just working with each child, who they are at their core, to help them best be able to achieve what they'd like to achieve in society. So it's very person specific, and I feel like ABA is really helping the children a lot.
For sure, building upon independence is very important when it comes to treatment. And so, considering your response in a more like global context, we have to consider what's really at stake here. So, why is it critical to intervene early on, and how does this impact long-term outcomes for children on the spectrum?
So I'll just speak to what I see at therapy where I am. I feel like what happens is a lot of times children with autism have a difficult time transitioning from one activity to another. They like things to be, very structured, and they have a difficult time moving from one thing on to another thing. And so what we tend to see happen is when these children do come in to see us, whatever age that might be, the parents have just tried to help avoid them getting really upset about things. So if the child has a big emotional response, the parents tend to try to help do whatever they can to try to help calm the child down. But by the time they come to see us in therapy, a lot of times now they are ruling the house. It's whatever we need to do to help, this child not have to have these explosive reactions. That's not going to work in everyday society. Right? That's not going to work when they go to school. That's not going to work when they go to daycare. That's not going to work when they go on a play date. So that early intervention and getting them to try to understand their emotions and help regulate their emotions and understand how that will help them be more successful in what they want to be able to do in school, on recess. That's the important thing. So we try to work with the child to help them make progress, but still let them be who they want to be and let them choose how important it is to be successful in this situation or that situation, how much they want to modify their own behavior. Does that make sense?
For sure. And that brings up an excellent point because the behaviors and habits that we have as an adolescent can affect us all the way up to adulthood. And just to follow up with our previous question regarding that, how does early intervention impact areas like social integration and career later in life?
So the way neurologically the brain works is you kind of look at it like a tree, and it's got branches, or the nerves are branches branching out in all kinds of different directions. And when we learn things and we take them in and we try them out and we see what works for us, in a sense, it's like pruning that tree. We're cutting back branches that don't make the tree work as well, and we're helping the ones that do make the tree work grow better. So by starting early, right off the bat, you're pruning that tree to pruning those nerves and those neurological connections to help to be most helpful for the child. So like I said, by the time they come into us, a lot of kids, they haven't learned to manage their emotions at all. A lot of them haven't learned to interact with others very well at all. We all know that one of the things with autism is sometimes that those children don't really like to even meet other people's eyes, which does not set them up for success when they have to be in a group setting. So the earlier that you can start to teach them that emotional regulation, interaction with others is going to be helpful for them, then the sooner they're setting up their brain in a way that's going to work for them. And again, it's like immediately making positive habits instead of having to change habits that don't work, because it's really hard to change habits.
Thank you. And I love how you brought up the idea about pruning the tree. So it's also important to talk about the challenges that families face when they're trying to access these services. So, what are some common barriers that people may face when trying to access these early intervention services?
I would say two big ones are a lot of times pediatricians will adopt a kind of a wait and see approach. They might notice something atypical when they see a child at 6 months old, but frequently they don't want to alarm the parents. They don't want to jump to any conclusions. So they apply the wait and see approach. Well, let's come back at 9 months and let's see how things are then. But my suggestion in that case would be to get, let the professionals, let the behavior therapists, let the speech therapist, let the occupational therapist, the physical therapist, at least just send them for an evaluation so that the people that really know, because pediatricians have so much that they need to know in their head from 0 to 18 years. They can't know every gross motor milestone. They can't know every fine motor milestone. So if I would say, if pediatricians were more proactive in sending those children to the people that are professionals in evaluating those specific skills, then things might be caught a little bit earlier and the child could start to learn earlier the more successful way to complete different tasks. The other thing with regard to that is there's such a high prevalence of autism now. I don't feel like the medical community has caught up in terms of number of providers with the number of children who need services. So often kids are on a wait list for like 6 months before they even can be tested. So I also agree, like, let's not wait and see. Let's put the child on the list. Let's put the child on the wait list to get tested. If we come back in 3 months and you're not noticing it, you can call back and take them off the list, as opposed to waiting 3 months and then putting them on the list to have to wait for 6 months.
These are all excellent propositions and are valuable to families tuning in right now. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of myths floating around about what early intervention is, what it does, and who it's for. It's important to break these myths. So, what are common misconceptions about early intervention in ASD? Are there misconceptions about what early intervention can and can't do?
Again, I really feel like mostly with pediatricians, people don't want to be alarmists. And so they want to say, well, let's just wait and see. It won't matter if we wait a little bit longer. And they can still get the benefit out of their therapy if we start, 6 months down the road instead of starting now. So I feel like people always tend to want to wait and see if something is going to work itself out or if intervention is needed. And so I would say that is a misconception, as rather than to just wait and see. I think you're setting the child up for the best chance of success by allowing them to have access to the different interventions that they might need as early as possible. And then lots of times they won't need it as long. I'm a physical therapist, so I'm going to use toe walking as an example. If I see a child who's just learning to walk and they want to walk up on their toes a lot, sometimes it's autism related, sometimes it's just sensory related. But I have found that if I see them young and I put them in orthotics that help them better walk with a heel to toe pattern instead of walking up on their toes, that they're going to have a heel to toe walking pattern, which is the most desirable walking pattern to prevent injury. They're going to do that so much earlier than if we let their brain develop the motor pattern of walking up on their toes. And now we have to get rid of that motor pattern and establish a whole new motor plan. it just seems like it's so much more successful to develop the right motor plan from the very beginning. So I guess to answer the question, the only thing I can really think of is not to go with the wait and see approach. It works better and it works faster if you start earlier, and then hopefully develop the right neurological pathways from the beginning, and then that will help the child learn faster, and they'll probably need less intervention in the long run.
Thank you for breaking these misconceptions. And then before we wrap up, I'd like to leave our listeners, especially any parents tuning in who might be early on this journey, with a little guidance. So simply put, what is one piece of evidence that you wish every parent of a newly intervened child?
So a piece of advice I would like to give is, a long time ago, there's a book, and unfortunately I even tried to look it up, but I couldn't find it. But the book is called, the idea of the book is, you're getting on an airplane and you're planning to go to Italy, and you're very excited for this trip to Italy. And you're on the plane, you make the trip, you're landing, and the pilot says, "Everybody, thank you for this flight. Welcome to Denmark." And all of a sudden, you're distraught because you're not in Italy, which is where you were expecting to be, and you're not going to have all of the different things that you were going to do in Italy. Now you're in Denmark and it looks totally different. But that doesn't mean that you can't have wonderful experiences and have a perfectly wonderful time in Denmark, just because Denmark wasn't the place you thought you were originally going to be going to. And I don't know if that makes sense. I think what it's trying to say is, life is going to be different. If you have a child with autism, life is going to be different than if you had a typical child, a neurotypical child. But that doesn't mean that life can't be wonderful and fun and loving and all of the things that life is, just because your child is different than you originally thought they were going to be. So my advice would be to be an advocate for your child, to help them receive whatever services they can possibly receive that you see they may have a need for, but let your child be who they are, and don't necessarily try to make them just like every other child, because each child has different gifts that they bring to the world. And we don't want to try to change those gifts just because the person is a different person than we originally thought they were going to be.
Yeah, and you know what? That's kind of really what Court 1 stands for, and ABC for sure. And that's where we both, are advocates. We are really seeing similarities between actually empowering the world with learning what autism is, and actually, instead of stigmatizing it, really destigmatizing it and learning that everyone is beautiful no matter what. But thank you so much once again. That's it for today's episode of All Things Autism. Thank you guys so much. And thank you so much for joining us today, Patricia. You have provided us with some crucial insights on family-based support and early intervention.
Can I add one last thing?
Of course.
Just goes from what you said. There is a school of thought now that says, like, some of the greatest thinkers of decade of time past, centuries past, Albert Einstein, some of the greatest thinkers in the world may have had autistic tendencies to one degree or another. Some of the greatest artists in the world might have had autistic tendencies in one way or another. And they only were able to come up with what they came up with because their way of thinking was a little bit different than the typical way of thinking. So what sometimes people see as a deficit may actually be, a gift to the world.
That's very true. And I'm glad that you were able to leave that last piece with us and our viewers. So lastly, don't forget to follow Court One for more updates and resources. And for our listeners, until next time, take care.